Good evening, and here we are today on Christian Ministry Care 1. We are here today and having a great conversation. We'll have a little chat going on with Mr. Robert Williams, licensed marriage and family therapist on today. June is the month of men's mental health recognition. And so on today, Mr. Williams is here with me. We're going to have him come in just a few moments and just share a few words with you concerning men's mental health. Hello, Mr. Williams. How are you today?
Well, hello. Normally I just call you sister, but I guess I got to call you something else today. But but it's good to be here with you.
It is. It is. It's good to have you here, bro. Just
Yeah,
in case y'all didn't know, Mr. Williams is my biological brother, but awesome
right.
man of God and awesome licensed marriage and family therapist. He has definitely the wisdom to share, and we wanted him to impart some wisdom concerning before the month of June is out. We wanted him to share just a few words and some insights. This is the beginning of something I believe is real because it's so important. The ministry to men and taking up the time to share with them and make them feel, uh, make them feel understood and these kinds of things when it comes and pertains to mental health also. So we're going to get ready now to relinquish the floor to Mr. Williams, and he will begin to share with us on tonight. It's in your hands, bro.
Appreciate it. I appreciate it. So I just want to spend a little bit of time, and if there are questions either by the host or anyone else, open to answering questions. So I just a little background. I've been in the mental health field, particularly as a licensed marriage and family therapist since about 2013, mostly specializing in couples, but also working with individuals, and most of the time individuals working with men. So I want to spend a little bit of time first talking about, well, what is men's mental health?
Mm-hmm.
And I know it was mentioned about, just understanding men a little bit as far
Yeah.
as things are concerned, because believe it or not, that's if I sit with either 20 couples or just individuals, that's one of the first things that comes out is
Mm-hmm.
that nobody understands me. And so that's a real big part of men coming to counseling and men involved with mental health
Mm-hmm.
concerns are just where things go. So let's just say working definition. I don't think this definition is any different than anyone else. It's someone, it refers to emotional, relational, and physical. And for
Yes.
those that have a spiritual connection, it also has to do with spiritual healthy
Mm-hmm.
traits. And so men are no exception.
That's right.
And anyone who has either four of those, no one person is always optimized at one or the other. But let's just say, for the sake of conversation, that's what we're talking about as far as how men handle stress, how men deal with release stress, and how men manage emotion. So I want to spend a little bit
Mhm.
of time talking about it because it's not really. First of all, when I hear that term mental health, I'm always mindful is that there's a difference between mental health and personality health. So I'm always
Mhm.
mindful about those two words
A difference.
because when a person hears, people hear mental, red flags go up all the time. And
Definitely.
so I want to make sure folks, there's a distinguishable difference between mental health issue and personality health issues, of which everyone crosses the spectrum with. But for men, let's just say it's about how we cope with stress, how we express our emotions,
Mm-hmm.
building, maintaining relationships, and that sense of purpose and identity. So I think for men, though, if I would say a majority of men and a majority of the men that I see on a regular basis, somewhere in the midst of all four of those things is primarily why they're sitting in front of me or other clinicians
That's true.
in and of itself. It's a mixture of all those things. And
Mm.
so I just want to start out with that. And so when
Okay.
we think of this
Great
month,
place to start.
June, yeah. Any questions that you want to interject in between?
Oh no, we're on a good track, Robert. We're on
Yeah,
a good track. I
yeah.
think we ought to stay right there. Yeah.
All
Go
right.
with that.
So let's kind of talk about these four things a little bit. I'll talk a little bit about it, coping with everyday stress. I think men, just in general, everyone has stress. There's no person that's exception with stress.
That's right.
So how men deal with stress is clearly different as far as how we deal with emotions,
Mm,
deal with relationships. All of that connects. I don't think there's any difference in a lot of different ways than how women deal with, but it's just so different as
mm-hmm.
far as how men do it. And so I'll dip into some of the cultural norms sometimes with men, how men kind of deal with it, which most of the times men deal with it in isolation.
I
Men
see.
deal with it with different types of emotions. Now, we all are on the emotional spectrum in some form. Some of us just may deal with certain emotions a little bit more difficult to deal with than others. So there's no exception. And
Mm-hmm.
so men really deal with these things and coping with stress very differently. We express our emotions differently. And sometimes we see the words not expressed healthily, but needless to say, that's how it is. And now, as far as relationships, now clearly, how you deal with your emotions influence your relationships.
Mm,
And so this may not apply to all men as far as things are concerned. But how we deal with relationships also is foundational. Men tend to withdraw,
mm-hmm.
men tend to isolate.
It's true.
So a part of that is to connect with those two things. Now, there could be some reasons for that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, going back to culture, going back to how men are raised, and some men
Yes.
are raised. Some carry stereotypical parts. Men don't. I'll use examples. Men don't cry, or men don't express their needs, or expressing emotions is too vulnerable.
Mm,
So some men grow up with that. Again, I say that doesn't apply to all men,
right.
but I do think that for a large section of our society, as it relates to men, and the data supports it in a lot of different ways,
Right. They still hold on to
on
that.
right on how
Mm-hmm.
men deal with emotions. So
It's true.
that's kind of how I want to kind of set things up and talk about later how it looks differently for men. But there's just a lot to cover with it.
There
And I know
is.
what June represents. And there's a lot of great things happening around. If you were to take a scan of some of the things that are taking place in June, a lot of it is addressed not only men's emotional well-being, but their mental well-being and
Mm-hmm.
health-wise, physical as
That's right.
well. Just a lot of
That's
things
right.
nationally
Right.
taking place to kind of close the circle as it
Mm,
relates to men, as far as in how men approach mental health. So there's a
yeah.
lot of great things that have happened in the month of June that hopefully will carry over into
Mm-hmm.
the preceding months as it relates to
Wow.
men's mental health. So that's kind of my survey
Mm-hmm.
of kind of the men's mental health. I'm sure there's a lot more to cover,
Yeah.
but I'll just kind of pause with it right there
Sure.
for any reflections or thoughts about
Right.
anything.
Robert, I think this is so dynamic because I really feel the burden of men. You mentioned earlier that white men don't come to counseling and some of the pride and things that they have not feeling understood. But they have definitely emotions. Society would much rather write them off, call them deadbeat dads, or call them lazy, call them these kinds of things when there's really a lot of other underlying, as you mentioned, cultural issues that are probably going on. But why do you think that there's not the time taken? Maybe it is in some places to really, I see some things gaining ground when it comes to
Mhm.
showing the urgency of men's health, and mental health. But why do you think it's not gaining ground as fast to take a step back and pause and spend time dealing with men's mental health and what they go through?
Well, that's a good question and a good reflection on it. I guess in my own personal and personal and professional look at it is a couple of things. Men, when you think about men and just how work is viewed, I'll use work as an example.
Okay.
And a lot of it is to look at is there's a belief is that, well, I don't have time to really deal with their mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
Most view it as I'm otherwise coping. I have to otherwise cope,
Wow.
or I have a job, I have a family, I have responsibilities that I have
Mm-hmm.
to take care of. And typically, most put themselves last as far as
Mm.
believing, that they have the time to slow down.
Mm.
Now, that mindset about it, some on some levels can understand it in a lot of different ways. I can understand why you may think or feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
However, we just don't operate in a world that revolves around that
That's right.
primarily. And
That's
so what
right.
ends up happening is burnout happens, relationships fall apart, even with children and
Mm-hmm.
teens, and so most don't understand it until things begin to fall apart a little bit. They know something's wrong, but they believe what they're doing
Yes.
overcomes it,
Ah,
and not realizing rarely does it.
wow.
It does overcome,
Right.
relationship disengagement. So a lot of it is really some of that, but we also have, when we look at television, we also look at how things are marketed, just mental
Mm-hmm.
health in general.
Mm-hmm.
I would say if a lot of it is done via TV, I would say most. I'm going to make a huge assumption is that most just don't pay attention to the channels to where most of the mental health awareness stuff comes on. I think
Yeah.
some of your sports channels, not that all men are into sports, some of
Right.
them are becoming better
Yeah.
at showing the mental health kind of, if you
Mm.
need help kind of thing. But I just think the marketing of the availability of programs, it just hasn't been there.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a variety of reasons. But
Wow.
I think just on a cursory level,
Mm-hmm.
that's some of it. That's men's belief is that
Yeah.
here's what my job, here's what my role is, and so I'll deal with myself with the rest.
Mm.
And so that's kind of where a lot of it starts. Great intentions, great understanding, great in a lot of instances work ethic, as far
Mm.
as things are concerned, but not realizing that not all that makes the man, and not all that makes the partner, not all that makes the father.
Mm.
And so what ends up happening is some get caught off guard
Wow.
with the level of disengagement that's happened sometimes within the family.
Wow. I really want you to speak to also, Robert. This is very passionate topic for me when it comes to
Sure.
that. But we really, I think I can speak for most women that we really need them to understand that we need them to survive. We really do need them. And as you have stated and alluded to, sometimes I guess it doesn't feel like a safe place to come out and be vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
because of that pride and because of that ego. And, everybody has it. But because of that stance and because of the beatdown of society on occasion as to why they don't feel safe putting themselves out there. But how do we cross that bridge and letting them know that our children need you? We need you. We need you to be, um, just that part. I don't want to go any further because I could go way in there
Yeah. Yeah.
concerning this.
Well, and again, that's another good point is how do partners, spouses, significant others, who, even co-parents, for the most part, kind of encourage fathers and men to be more present and to deal with their own
That's a
mental
good
health
word.
situations. I tend to look at it through the lens of, and it really all depends. I mean, I think sometimes if, for example, let's say, for example, some of that issue that the man may be experiencing really is kind of coming from the source. So, in not so many ways, and I'll switch and give the opposite is, couples, and I use couple dynamics. When couples are in distress and they both are kind of in it with
Hmm.
each other as
Hmm.
far as things are concerned, and I would say the conflict is high.
Right.
Men struggle with hearing sometimes when conflict is high. You need to get your mental health in order. See that's
Hmm.
not a good time for
Right.
most men to hear
That's true.
that. Hey, a part of our issue is your mental health.
Mm,
Sometimes it comes out in that format. I'm
mm,
not saying every format, but to
right.
me, it's almost like, okay, how is a man to take it?
That's true.
Most don't take it well.
That's true.
But then there's the other part who are the balcony, who is that support in the balcony, right? For the partner. They're
Hmm.
there. They're with them the whole way. But yet the resistance is high. You have high
Mm,
support, but high resistance
mm, mhm,
to it still, which
mhm.
puts a partner sometimes in a catch situation. There's no amount of support when a partner's still in that mode
That's
of
true. That's
I
true.
don't I don't need it. I don't feel it's there. And so
Mm,
sometimes things fall on different spectrums as
mhm.
far as things are concerned, to where regrettably sometimes it takes a high issue for a man sometimes to move into counseling. I sometimes say, there's a percentage of men that don't know they're going to counseling until the day they're in counseling. Sometimes that happens as far as,
Yes,
I hear it a lot. I don't know why I'm here as far as encounter,
that's
but
right.
they're here because the partner wants
Mhm.
them to be there. And they're very honest about it. I really can't tell you why I'm here. As far as okay, fine, let's just
Yeah,
work from that.
yeah.
And so I think to your point is, how can partners continue to support? How I think partners have to differentiate, have to separate conflict from care
Mhm,
in a way that says, when you're in conflict, of which all couples have,
mhm.
once you're in a relationship, conflict is going to happen.
Right.
Folks just have to become mindful of what they say in conflict.
That's true.
That kind of, it really supports the stereotype
Mm,
as far as things are concerned. I'm pretty sure if I was we were talking doing about women's mental health month, I would be saying that's the opposite,
right, right.
because both kind of tend to use it in that drama. So I think there's two spectrums.
Mhm,
In conflict, when it happens, it reinforces why not go. But
mhm.
yet, when a partner is supportive, a partner may still be resistant for it as far
Mm,
as things are concerned. And then there's the other element sometimes too. I think men have to support men.
that's
From a
true.
biblical understanding, I know I
That's
use a scripture of iron shopping iron, even though biblically it kind of sort of means something else, but for the
sure.
sake of conversation,
It
we'll
can
use
mean
it.
that too.
Is that men
Strengthen the
have
countenance
to
of his brother.
kind of get each other to the point. Men can sit down and we can look at sports, we can do this, we can do that together, and we could take all that experience. And if someone says so and so is dealing with some issues, they will say, "Well, they seem fine with me. And what did you do for 5 hours?" Well, we watched football. We
Mhm.
had a great time. Okay, well, that's so men can be kind of that
Yeah,
dimensional.
yeah.
Not all men in all instances. And
Mhm.
so, but I think men can be a better resource for men
Right.
to get there. Hearing it from your partner is one thing,
That's true.
which I think is important. But
Mm.
men, encouraging men that generationally, if you want to break generational patterns,
Oh,
if you want to
that's
break,
great.
you want to break family patterns, here's what you have to do, as far as to
Mm.
kind of take care of yourself, put
Wow.
yourself first as far as your mental health is concerned, and everything else will follow. So, long answer to a short question, but that's kind of how I see it.
That's awesome, Robert. I don't know whether you've ever seen the movie out on PureFlix and other religious kind of channels entitled Forged. um, Forge is an awesome where men come together and men meeting men and brothers encouraging one another. Older men mentoring young men, kind of sort of thing, and realizing that need for brotherhood and somebody to understand and those kinds of things. And you reminded me so much of that. And there's so much, like we've said, you could share with us concerning men's health, mental health, as well as you mentioned earlier, physical health, their relationships, how they break down or have been broken down, things that causes them depression, things
Mhm.
that cause them to have low esteem. Some of them even have not even crossed over. Some, we would probably be surprised of the statistics about the number of men who have been sexually molested, that
Mhm.
have gone through these kinds of, so there's all kinds of stages for them to be addressed, and we're just touching the tip of the iceberg, not even the surface,
Right.
concerning some of the topics and things we could really go after that would really draw this audience in, because I really do believe they need to be drawn in, and not only them, Robert.
Sure.
I think if we held it together tight enough, we could really get the young men to understand this before they even get to that phase,
Yeah.
that place in life. They understand that, hey, there's a place for you. You can't get involved with gangs or get involved. You're too valuable for that. You've got children to raise. You've got this to do. What's some things
Sure.
we can put in place that can kind of help? And so my next question to you is, how do you think we go about laying out these platforms? What are some doors that can be open to kind of help this matter?
Yeah, I think, and again, another good question that spans generations. I sometimes say in small settings to get what you're describing would almost have to have complete blackout for 100 years of technology, or in
Yes.
not so many ways, and kind of start over. I mean, what I mean by that is everything is just changing, and I tend to say, yeah, I grew up in an era to where there's a lot of pressure, peer
Hmm.
pressure,
Hmm.
as far as things are concerned. But we didn't grow up in this era to where technology plays a huge part in shaping
Right. We didn't.
identity. It's just so much that's happening to young men today
Yeah.
that is quite overwhelming. That's why in a
Hmm.
lot of instances when the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Health includes video gaming
Oh,
as
yeah.
an addictive issue.
It is
Well,
addictive.
think about it. It's come that far in a
Mm.
sense to where it's become an issue. They are acknowledging
Wow.
that this way of functioning for some young men causes emotional, physical, and relational issues to them. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's some acknowledgement that there is some impact that media, gaming, or however you want to frame it, is
Mm-hmm.
having on men. And let me just say, I'm not just throwing shade at media. There's a lot of great media things happening out there as
Yes.
far as things are concerned. There's a lot of great things happening in technology as far as things are concerned, advances in it, in the health fields, and the
Mm-hmm.
across the board in general. So this is not that. But what we're looking at is when you look at mental health and you do a complete history and
Mm-hmm.
find out that someone may have gravitated towards X, Y, and Z. It's an issue. But back to the main question of what do we do about it?
Right.
Well, uh, a lot of it, I tend to say sometimes starting over is easy to say, but we're going to have to, I use some military terms in those senses that you got to think tactically and you
Mm-hmm.
have to think strategically,
Wow.
because the
That's
here
good.
and now is still happening. You have men who need things here and now
Yeah.
versus generations to come. I think you got to get back into the school systems. I think you
Mm.
have to reintroduce certain things. When I grew up, basic economics was a part of school.
It
You
was.
would you knew how to. We had sewing class in
Yes.
school. We had
Had
uh,
to take it.
you had to know how to write a check
Mm-hmm.
in high school, in school. So I think back to basics is what has to happen with our education system. They have to take account for it in some way or another, getting back to basics in some
Mm.
form. Now, that's only a part of it. Society, culturally, community, all those things factor into it as
Mm-hmm.
far as taking a stronger hold of things. I tend to say in certain places, if you go in certain places, they're right spot on dealing with community stuff.
Mm.
You know it from the moment you go there.
That's true.
But in other instances, which I think is the majority, there's an absence of it. And so, with an absence of community in a lot of different ways,
Mm-hmm.
you have folks figuring it out on their own. Young
Ah,
boys who don't have fathers in their life,
right.
they figure it out on their own.
Yeah.
They're looking at television, they're looking at peers. Between 30-40% of young boys and girls do not have fathers in their home.
That's true.
It's a whole nother conversation about why that's not
It
the
is.
case. That's a
It
separate issue.
is.
But we know that's statistically kind of
Mm-hmm.
where it goes. And if that's true, no matter how great a job the mom is doing or
That's
whoever that single parent is, as far as things are concerned, if they live in this society, they're going to have to work, which
mm,
means they're going to have to turn their child over to an educational system for at least 8, 10 hours a day,
yeah.
and then turn them over to somewhere else as far as aftercare, which means they have very little time in the evening to do
Mm-hmm.
some of the things that needs to be done. Not that
Mm,
it's impossible, but
right.
the amount of pressure that parents are under today,
Mm,
as far as things are concerned. So we have to find a way how to get back to the grassroots
right.
of it. And so
Okay.
that's kindergarten, introducing some very soft skills,
Mm-hmm.
emotional attunement, emotional regulation, type skills, distress tolerance type things. I know I'm
Mm,
talking things that I typically work with adults on,
sure.
but if we can reduce some of those things to kindergarten level,
That's right. Early childhood.
elementary level, middle
Mm-hmm.
school level, high school level, on
That's
how to
right.
regulate emotions and how to deal with distress tolerance, increasing
Very important.
interpersonal skills,
Mm-hmm.
all those type skills. Because what we're really talking about are a few areas that, if you look at any diagnostic measure involving any antisocial behavior or any explosive type behavior of a DSM level, it involves folks who can't regulate those things.
That's true. Emotions. That's right.
And so, if we can
Excuse me.
get those back into the system, similar to how economics was there, basic sewing and cooking classes was there,
Right. Back
I think
to
kids
basics.
could have a better chance when they become teens and young adults to be more regulated and better. So I think that's an approach that has to happen with it, outside of some community things that I know are taking place around in some cities and states. But the participation in a lot
Right.
of them is just not there. For whatever
Wow.
reason, folks are just not really attuned to it that way. And there
Yeah.
may be some valid reasons
Mm-hmm.
why
You're right.
they're not doing it.
You're
But
right.
that's my kind of short way to look at it from a
Yeah.
perspective, is
That's a
what we
great way to
are.
look
So
at it, Robert. I think that hey, we're coming to the end of our session on this
sure.
afternoon, on this evening, but I think we've opened up some great channels and some great doors that can be planned out that we can come back to. I know you're coming back, so
Well,
and
because we've talked about that.
yeah,
No,
we coming
I
back
enjoy it.
because
Yeah,
there's so much that can be done. So, what I want to do from here, Robert, I know we have much to ground we've covered today, many
sure.
things we've tapped into and just touched on that is going to need to be addressed. And I know that we'll have some comments, some things flowing, and we'll be in touch with those who need. I did notice that we had some live on tonight. And so we will know from here where we will go from here when it comes to not just men's mental health. I still think that needs to be addressed outside of gender,
Hmm.
but also life in general and dealing with marriage and family
Sure.
therapy and counselings. And so I think that is going to be vitally important. So if you will, from here, Robert, anything left, anything that you would like to share before we go off air on tonight?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the attention to it. I sometimes say, sometimes clinicians, mental health or LMFTs, we sometimes can get in the field a lot. We can just spend a way too much time in the field
Hmm.
and not necessarily doing things in other formats. And I think it's important that, not that we're the exception to the rule, that we're any better than any. It's just getting a better understanding about what's out there, where people are
Hmm.
with it, and being able to speak to some of the things that we know, that if we have a percentage of people coming through our doors with in session,
Hmm.
out of session, there has to be even 10 times that many.
Mm,
And so I think a part of it is we got to holistically look at what's happening in our culture. I would say the last 20 years have been quite evident that in a lot of parts of our nation, we have deregulated emotionally
mhm,
across the board. You see it in government, you see it in communities. And I sometimes say, Where has the mental health world been in not helping society deal with these emotional issues a lot better? And so I think this kind of format allows an opportunity to just talk face to face, personal about it. Because I think the last 10 years, 20 years have been rough on people emotionally. There have been an increase in disability claims due to depression. There's been an increase in suicides. There may be other ton of reasons why, but we can't
Mhm.
ignore the data. Is that we're at a different, emotionally deregulated era,
Wow,
and we got to do something about it.
I concur. I agree, Robert. So here we are tonight,
Yep.
Mr. Robert Williams, licensed marriage and family therapist, and talking about men's mental health. And so we will be back. We will be back again. Come by, stop by. You can go to cmc1.org. You can go to Facebook page, Christian Ministry Care 1. You can go to YouTube channel. We're all there. Blessings to you on this evening. And until we come together again, have a great night.